Think your morning shower takes effort? Now imagine living in a time where every drop of water was a precious commodity, soap was a luxury, and the very idea of a bath could spark heated debates. Welcome to the Wild West, a time when staying clean was an extraordinary feat of resourcefulness, determination, and sometimes pure luck. Bathing wasn't just a chore. It was a luxury few could afford. Picture this. You're on the frontier, surrounded by dust storms, scarce water, and weeks of unwashed clothes. Now add the widespread belief that frequent bathing could make you ill, weakening your body and inviting disease. You might think twice before stepping into a tub, if you even had one. In this video, we'll uncover the gritty truths of hygiene in the Wild West. From the laborious process of hauling and heating water to the bizarre alternatives settlers used in place of soap, we'll explore every layer of dirt, sweat, and grime. How did people cope with lice and skin infections? What role did cultural differences play in hygiene practices? And how much of what we think we know about frontier life is a myth? Each chapter in this story reveals a fascinating piece of history. You'll learn how Native Americans embraced regular bathing as a spiritual practice, why settlers reused bathwater until it was almost black, and how traveling bath vendors brought a touch of luxury to the dusty plains. So grab your loofah and buckle up, because this deep dive into the hygiene horrors of the Wild West will leave you both fascinated and thankful for modern plumbing. By the end, you might even find yourself wondering, could I survive in a world where baths were a rare and sometimes risky privilege? Let's get started with a look at the strange beliefs about bathing in the 19th century and how they shaped the everyday lives of settlers, townsfolk, and frontiersmen alike. In the Wild West, bathing was more than a rare activity. It was a polarizing subject tied to deep cultural beliefs and misunderstandings about health. For many settlers, the very act of immersing oneself in water was viewed with suspicion. Doctors of the time often advised against frequent bathing, warning that it could weaken the body by opening the pores, leaving individuals vulnerable to disease. These fears weren't rooted in malice, but in a lack of understanding about germs and hygiene, which were still poorly understood in the 19th century. Adding to this fear were prevailing medical theories like miasma, which suggested that diseases were caused by foul odors in the air rather than bacteria. Settlers believed that staying dirty, or at least not bathing too often, offered a protective layer against these harmful smells. While we might scoff at this today, it's worth remembering that even the wealthiest Victorian households adhered to similar beliefs. However, not all groups shared this apprehension about cleanliness. Native American tribes across the region often practiced regular bathing, viewing it as a vital part of physical, spiritual, and social well-being. Rivers, hot springs, and other natural water sources were used frequently for cleansing and ceremonies. These habits stood in stark contrast to those of settlers, who often considered such practices excessive, wasteful, or even unhealthy. The cultural gap was wide, and unfortunately, settlers sometimes interpreted native hygiene routines through the lens of prejudice and misunderstanding. In urban areas, Victorian influences began to reshape attitudes toward cleanliness. By the mid-1800s, wealthier families in cities started to embrace weekly baths as plumbing and sanitation systems improved. Bathing became not only a hygienic practice, but also a symbol of refinement and modernity. Yet these trends were slow to reach the rugged frontier, where hauling water and heating it over a fire made even a monthly bath a significant effort. Despite these divides, there were moments when cleanliness became non-negotiable. During outbreaks of diseases like cholera and dysentery, communities were sometimes forced to reassess their attitudes toward hygiene. Public health campaigns in urban centers highlighted the benefits of bathing and hand-washing, though such ideas often struggled to gain traction in remote settlements where survival came first. This mix of fear, practicality, and cultural influence created a unique patchwork of bathing beliefs in the 19th century. Whether someone bathed regularly often depended on their location, resources, and personal philosophy. It's a vivid reminder that even something as universal as cleanliness is shaped by the time and place we live in. Bathing in the Wild West wasn't just a chore, it was an ordeal. The process began with hauling water, a task that could take hours depending on how far you had to walk to the nearest well, river, or stream. Carrying buckets of water back to your home was back-breaking work, often requiring multiple trips just to gather enough for a single bath. And if you lived in an arid region where water was scarce, even finding a reliable source could feel like striking gold. Once the water was collected, the next challenge was heating it. This step required lighting a fire, maintaining it long enough to heat the water in small batches, and then carefully pouring it into a tub. Tin and wooden tubs were the most common, but they were often small and uncomfortable, forcing bathers to crouch rather than stretch out. For large families, bathing often became a communal effort, with the same water reused for multiple people. This practice wasn't just practical, it was a necessity. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," is believed to have originated from this very practice. By the time it was the youngest family member's turn, the water was so murky it would have been easy to lose sight of a small child in the tub. While this image might seem humorous today, it underscores just how precious water was and how much effort went into every single bath. Water scarcity was particularly challenging in the arid regions of the West, such as parts of Arizona and Nevada. In these areas, water was primarily reserved for drinking, cooking, and tending to livestock. Bathing, when it happened, was a carefully planned event. Some settlers got creative, using damp cloths for a quick wipe-down, or relying on sand scrubs to remove dirt and sweat when water wasn't available. Outdoor bathing presented its own set of challenges. Rivers, lakes, and streams were often the only options for settlers without tubs. While these natural sources provided much-needed relief, they were fraught with risks. Freezing water made bathing a test of endurance, while wildlife, ranging from snakes to leeches, added an element of danger. Privacy was another issue, especially for women, who often bathed at night or in secluded spots to avoid being seen. In towns and more developed areas, bathhouses offered a solution for those who could afford them. These establishments, often attached to saloons or inns, charged fees for access to a tub and hot water. While they provided a welcome reprieve, they weren't without issues. Crowded conditions and questionable sanitation sometimes made these bathhouses breeding grounds for disease. Despite the hardships, bathing logistics in the Wild West showcased the resilience and ingenuity of its people. Every bath was a testament to the effort settlers put into maintaining a semblance of cleanliness in an environment where even the simplest tasks were monumental. For settlers in the Wild West, the question wasn't just how to bathe, it was where. The location of a bath often depended on available resources, and the options ranged from makeshift setups at home to natural water sources and public bathhouses. Each setting came with its own set of challenges, compromises, and risks. At home, bathing setups were typically rudimentary. Tin or wooden tubs were placed in a central area like the kitchen or near the fireplace for warmth. These tubs were small and cramped, making the experience far from relaxing. Water had to be carefully rationed, so families often reused the same bathwater. The process usually started with the head of the household and worked down to the youngest child, ensuring that every drop of water was used efficiently. In more rural areas, where tubs weren't always available, settlers often relied on rivers, lakes, and streams for bathing. These natural water sources were convenient, but came with a host of risks. Wildlife, such as snakes and leeches, posed a threat to unsuspecting bathers, while freezing temperatures in winter made outdoor bathing almost unbearable. Privacy was another issue, especially for women. Many had to find secluded spots or bathe at odd hours to avoid being seen. Bathing outdoors wasn't always an individual activity. In some cases, entire families or groups bathed together to make the most of a trip to the river. These communal bathing sessions were as much about practicality as they were about bonding, though they sometimes led to humorous or awkward situations. In towns and more developed settlements, public bathhouses offered a more structured option for bathing. These establishments were often attached to saloons, hotels, or boarding houses and provided tubs, hot water, and sometimes even soap for a fee. Bathhouses became popular among miners, travelers, and townsfolk who sought relief from the grime of daily life. However, they weren't always affordable or accessible, especially for lower-income settlers. Bathhouses also varied greatly in quality. Some were clean and well-maintained, offering a luxurious experience for the time. Others were less sanitary, and overcrowding often turned them into hotspots for the spread of diseases. Despite these issues, bathhouses played a vital role in towns, serving as social hubs where people gathered to unwind, share stories, and exchange news. For wealthier families or urban residents, the introduction of indoor plumbing in the late 19th century marked a turning point. Houses with dedicated bathrooms and running water were still rare in the Wild West, but they symbolized progress and modernity. These advancements made bathing more convenient, though they remained out of reach for most settlers. Wherever it took place, at home, outdoors, or in a public bathhouse, bathing in the Wild West was never just a routine task. It reflected the ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability of the people who braved the frontier. Keeping clean in the Wild West required resourcefulness, as settlers had to make do with whatever materials were available. With modern hygiene products still decades away, settlers turned to homemade solutions, natural remedies, and creative improvisation to maintain a semblance of cleanliness. Soap was one of the most important tools for hygiene, but it wasn't readily available in stores, especially in rural areas. Most settlers made their own by boiling animal fat with lye, a caustic chemical derived from wood ash. The resulting soap was effective but harsh, often leaving skin dry and irritated. Scented soaps were a luxury reserved for wealthier families in towns, where imported goods were more accessible. For many settlers, making enough soap to last through the year was a significant task, often done during colder months when other chores were less demanding. When soap wasn't available, settlers used alternative cleaning methods. Sand and ashes were common substitutes, acting as abrasive scrubbing agents to remove dirt and grease from the skin. Herbs like sage and mint were also popular, both for their cleansing properties and their ability to mask odors. These natural remedies were especially useful for washing hair, as shampoos didn't exist yet. Instead, settlers used oils to manage dryness and tame lice infestations, which were a constant problem. Combing out lice was a routine task, and for men working outdoors, shaving their heads was a practical way to avoid the hassle altogether. Perfumes and powders became essential tools for those who wanted to maintain appearances, particularly during social gatherings. Settlers would sprinkle powders on their skin and clothing to absorb oils and mask unpleasant odors. Perfumes were often homemade, using floral extracts or spices mixed with alcohol. While these products didn't solve hygiene issues, they helped settlers feel cleaner and more presentable. Clothing also played a significant role in hygiene practices. Since full-body baths were rare, settlers relied on frequent changes of undergarments to absorb sweat and grime. Washing clothes was another labor-intensive task, requiring settlers to haul water, heat it, and scrub garments by hand. Many families had dedicated wash days, where all available hands pitched in to clean clothes, linens, and other fabrics. Regional differences also influenced hygiene practices. In arid areas where water was scarce, settlers often adapted by using dry cleaning methods, such as wiping themselves with cloths dampened with minimal water or scrubbing with sand. In contrast, those living near rivers or lakes had more opportunities to wash thoroughly, though they still faced challenges like cold temperatures and wildlife. Even basic hygiene tools like toothbrushes were rare in the Wild West. Instead, Settlers used makeshift solutions such as rubbing their teeth with twigs, charcoal, or baking soda to maintain oral health. While these methods were rudimentary, they reflected the ingenuity required to survive in such harsh conditions. Hygiene products and practices in the Wild West were a blend of necessity and creativity. Settlers had to adapt to their environment, finding ways to stay clean in an era where resources were limited, and hygiene was often a secondary concern. Their methods may seem primitive by today's standards, but they were a testament to the resilience and adaptability of frontier life. The lack of consistent hygiene in the Wild West led to widespread health issues that were often unavoidable given the conditions. Settlers faced a host of challenges, from minor skin irritations to life-threatening diseases, all exacerbated by limited medical knowledge and inadequate sanitation. For many, the frontier's rugged lifestyle came with a heavy toll on their health. Skin infections were among the most common ailments. Dust, sweat, and grime, combined with infrequent bathing, created the perfect breeding ground for bacteria. Settlers often developed sores, rashes, and boils, which were not only painful but could also become seriously infected if left untreated. With no antibiotics available, even a minor skin infection could escalate into a life-threatening condition. Lice and scabies were a near-constant problem for settlers, travelers, and anyone living in close quarters. Lice infestations spread rapidly, especially in households where clothing and bedding were shared. People frequently combed for lice or used oils and herbal remedies to control the pests, but eradication was difficult. Scabies, caused by mites burrowing into the skin, was another common issue, leading to intense itching and discomfort. These parasitic conditions were often endured for long periods due to the lack of effective treatments. Poor wound care further contributed to health problems. Without access to sterilized tools or bandages, settlers often relied on makeshift solutions like wrapping cuts in cloth or applying herbal poultices. While some remedies provided relief, others introduced bacteria into open wounds, leading to infections that could result in gangrene or sepsis. Minor injuries, such as cuts and scrapes, could have dire consequences if untreated or improperly managed. Waterborne diseases were another significant health risk in the Wild West. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever were common in frontier towns and settlements, where clean water was often scarce. Poor sanitation practices, such as disposing of waste near water sources, contributed to the spread of these diseases. During outbreaks, entire communities could be decimated, with mortality rates reaching alarming levels. Epidemics frequently swept through the Wild West, further illustrating the connection between hygiene and health. The lack of understanding about how diseases spread meant that preventative measures were often ineffective or non-existent. For example, during cholera outbreaks, some settlers believed that burning aromatic herbs could cleanse the air, while others mistakenly attributed the disease to bad luck or divine punishment. To cope with the unpleasant realities of infrequent bathing, settlers turned to perfumes and powders to mask body odors. While these products provided a temporary solution, they did little to address the root causes of poor hygiene. In some cases, the overuse of powders or oils could even worsen skin conditions by clogging pores or attracting dirt. Despite the challenges, settlers demonstrated remarkable resilience. They developed innovative ways to address health issues with the resources they had, from using honey as an antiseptic to brewing herbal teas for internal ailments. However, the harsh environment and limited medical options meant that health consequences were an ever-present reality in the Wild West. This period in history serves as a stark reminder of the importance of hygiene and sanitation. The struggles faced by settlers underscore how critical these basic needs are to overall health, a lesson that remains relevant even today. In the Wild West, bathing was a rare luxury, often reserved for significant events or special occasions. While daily or even weekly baths were uncommon, certain moments in life demanded cleanliness, making the arduous process of bathing worthwhile. These occasions ranged from personal milestones to public ceremonies, each revealing the social and cultural importance of hygiene in a time when it was far from routine. Weddings were among the most common reasons for settlers to bathe. For brides and grooms, a thorough cleaning before their big day was more than just practical, it was symbolic. A bath marked a fresh start, a literal and metaphorical cleansing as they began their new lives together. Family members and wedding guests often followed suit, leading to days of preparation as water was hauled, heated, and shared among participants. Social gatherings such as dances, church services, and town fairs also prompted settlers to wash up. These events were rare opportunities to mingle and showcase one's best self, making a clean appearance essential. Perfumes, powders, and freshly laundered clothes often complemented a rare bath, helping attendees mask any lingering odors. For many, these gatherings were the highlight of the season, and the effort to prepare was seen as part of the celebration. Military life provided another context for special occasion bathing. Soldiers stationed in remote outposts were often granted access to water and supplies for bathing before inspections, parades, or ceremonial duties. Bathing wasn't just about personal hygiene, it was a matter of discipline and morale, reflecting the pride and order expected in the ranks. For many soldiers, these baths were rare, but deeply appreciated breaks from the grime and monotony of frontier service. In the more isolated regions of the West, traveling bath vendors became an unexpected yet vital service. These enterprising individuals transported tubs, water, and heating equipment to remote settlements, offering settlers the rare luxury of a warm soak for a fee. For miners, ranchers, and other laborers far from towns, these mobile bathhouses were a welcome reprieve, despite the cost. Stories of these vendors often highlight the novelty and excitement they brought to the communities they served. In towns and cities, bathhouses attached to saloons or inns became popular spots for those seeking cleanliness and relaxation. These establishments were particularly important for travelers and traders, who often arrived covered in dust and sweat after weeks on the road. Bathhouses charged by the tub or hour, offering hot water, soap, and occasionally towels. While these facilities were a luxury for some, they also became social hubs where people could share news, gossip, and camaraderie. Bathing for special occasions wasn't limited to adults. Children often received their rare baths in preparation for family portraits, religious ceremonies, or school inspections. These baths were usually supervised, ensuring that the little ones were thoroughly cleaned, sometimes for the first time in months. The effort involved in preparing children for these events highlights the importance settlers placed on making a good impression, even under challenging circumstances. These moments of cleanliness served as a reminder of the social and cultural significance of bathing, even in a time when it was far from an everyday activity. Special occasion baths were more than a matter of hygiene. They were acts of care, respect, and connection, reflecting the settlers' resilience and determination to maintain dignity amid the hardships of frontier life. Hollywood has painted a romanticized picture of life in the Wild West, and bathing is no exception. From cowboys relaxing in steaming tubs to elegant saloons offering luxurious amenities, these depictions often stray far from the gritty reality of frontier hygiene. Separating the myths from the realities reveals just how challenging and unglamorous bathing was in this era. One popular myth is that people bathed frequently in whiskey or beer. While this makes for a great story, the reality was far less indulgent. Whiskey and beer were precious commodities on the frontier, reserved for drinking or bartering rather than bathing. Alcohol was sometimes used as a disinfectant for wounds, but the idea of soaking in a barrel of whiskey was more folklore than fact. Another misconception is the belief that settlers lived in constant filth, oblivious to the concept of cleanliness. While hygiene was undoubtedly difficult, settlers did what they could with the resources available. From homemade soaps to sand scrubs, people found creative ways to stay clean. Their efforts may seem primitive by today's standards, but they reflect a determined attempt to maintain dignity and health in challenging circumstances. The idea that dirt provided a protective barrier against disease is another myth often tied to this era. While it's true that some settlers believed bathing could weaken the body and invite illness, this wasn't a universal belief. Native American communities, for instance, practiced frequent bathing in rivers and hot springs, viewing cleanliness as essential to both physical and spiritual health. The contrast between settlers and indigenous peoples highlights the cultural diversity of hygiene practices in the Wild West. Hollywood's portrayal of frontier bathing also fails to capture the labor involved. The iconic image of a cowboy soaking in a wooden tub might seem relaxing, but the reality was anything but. Behind every bath was hours of effort, hauling water, heating it over a fire, and ensuring enough was left for other family members. For many, the idea of a long, leisurely soak was a luxury they could scarcely afford. Public bathhouses, often glamorized as opulent spaces, were usually far more utilitarian. In reality, these establishments varied widely in quality. While some offered clean tubs and hot water, others were poorly maintained, with reused water and questionable sanitation. These conditions sometimes turned bathhouses into breeding grounds for disease rather than refuges of cleanliness. Myths about Wild West bathing aren't limited to Hollywood. Stories passed down through generations often exaggerate or romanticize frontier life, creating a nostalgic but misleading picture of the past. Anecdotes about cowboys bathing in moonshine or settlers using bizarre methods to clean themselves make for entertaining tales, but they rarely align with historical accounts. The reality of bathing in the Wild West was far less glamorous than the myths suggest. It was a challenging, time-consuming task that required ingenuity, effort, and a tolerance for discomfort. While myths can be fun to explore, the truth offers a more vivid picture of the resilience and resourcefulness required to survive on the frontier. By examining these myths and realities, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity of those who lived through this era. Their struggles with hygiene remind us how far we've come and how much we take for granted in our modern, water-filled tubs. The Wild West was a time of extraordinary resilience, resourcefulness, and adaptability. Nowhere was this more evident than in how people managed the basic yet monumental task of hygiene. Bathing wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a battle against the elements, a test of ingenuity, and a reflection of the broader challenges settlers faced every day. From hauling water and making soap, to battling lice and enduring the discomfort of rare baths, hygiene in the Wild West was shaped by necessity. Settlers didn't have the luxury of running water or modern toiletries. Instead, they relied on homemade remedies, shared resources, and sheer determination to maintain a semblance of cleanliness. While myths and Hollywood portrayals often romanticize this era, the reality was far grittier. Bathing was laborious, infrequent, and sometimes risky, but it was also a vital part of life. Whether for special occasions like weddings or practical needs like staying presentable for work, the effort settlers put into hygiene speaks to their endurance and ingenuity. The contrasts between settler practices, Native American traditions, and the growing influence of Victorian urban hygiene remind us that even something as universal as bathing can vary widely based on culture, resources, and beliefs. These differences add depth to our understanding of the Wild West, showing that it was as much a place of diversity and adaptation as it was of hardship. Looking back on their struggles, it's remarkable how far we've come. Today, we take for granted the convenience of hot showers, scented soaps, and advanced hygiene products. The effortlessness of modern cleanliness stands in stark contrast to the daily grind of frontier life, where even a simple bath could take hours of work. Could you imagine living in a world where water had to be rationed and bathing was a rare luxury? How would you fare in a time when grime, sweat, and dust were constant companions? Reflecting on these questions not only deepens our appreciation for the comforts of modern life, but also honors the resilience of those who came before us. If you've enjoyed this journey through the hygiene horrors of the Wild West, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. And don't forget to let us know in the comments how you think you'd have managed in such challenging conditions. Would you thrive with a bucket of water and homemade soap, or would you miss the luxury of a bubble bath? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the dirt and determination of frontier life. Until next time, stay curious, and perhaps a little cleaner than the cowboys of old.